Hello, my name is Janbir Sandhu, and I'm the Internship and Training Manager here at HomeFirst. Welcome to the New Hire Training Week series, and welcome to the training on the California Mandated Reporter Training. All right, the objectives of our training today is for you to know who are mandated reporters, what does child and adult elder maltreatment look like, when and how do you make a report for both, and what happens after a report is made. So first I want to review that the Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act, or CANRA, was first designed in 1963, in which California was the first state to mandate that physicians report physical abuse of children. And by 1963, all states had child abuse protection laws with definitions, procedures, a list of mandated reporters, and liabilities for failure to report. And we'll review all of that and what it looks like today. By the 1980, CANRA was passed in California, and it's been amended multiple times, and the list of those who are mandated to report continues to grow. So one of the things that you want to know as background information to CANRA and the Child Abuse Reporting Act is that the very first case of child abuse was actually reported around the 1930s. In which children did work, right? Children worked in mills and did not have a primary objective of learning and growing. We did not see children as still learning and different from adults. We just saw them as mini us. And that was the case for a family when they were keeping their child in a cage outside of their home like livestock. And a individual was driving across and saw that this was very unfair, but there were no laws protecting children, and they had to report this case through animal husbandry rights and animal law abuse laws to the state in order for the family to do something about taking better care of their child. So we had animal abuse reporting laws in this country before we had laws regarding humans, regarding children, how abuse and neglect of children. So here's some information, very recent, from April 1st, 2017 to March 31st of 2018 on the Child Welfare Dynamic Report. These are children who have had one or more allegations of report of abuse occur, and you could see that there were a lot of cases that were substantiated, which means they went through. There was some cause. Inconclusive, we don't know yet. Unfounded, again, not enough information. Assessed, if only evaluated out. They were assessed, maybe some services were provided, and not yet determined, meaning still yet in the works. So you can see that substantiated cases look a lot smaller than if we combined all of the cases together, right? So one of the worries that I always run into in training is talking with individuals about, well, what happens if I file a report and it's not true, right? Well, if that's the case, then it'll be evaluated out, right? And you can see that's quite a large area. And there's a lot less cases that are substantiated and services are provided. And we'll talk a little bit more about what services can be provided, and removal is not always the best strategy and is never the first strategy that child welfare services will take in order to protect a child from abuse. Again, if you see abuse, you want to report it. And all these colors that you see on this chart, the red, of course, indicates sexual abuse. The green indicates severe neglect. Yellow, exploitation. Caretaker absence or incapacity is in that brown, which is hardly noticeable. You can see it in the top and the very bottom, not yet determined. Physical abuse, that bright purple. And general neglect is the largest one that we see in the middle of every bar. And emotional abuse is in that eggplant purple. And so these are the different types, dispositions of abuse and dispositions of kind of what happened to the cases, in which case a child is accounted for only once in its highest severity. So even though there were more multiple allegations, we're only counting the highest severity. This information is provided by the California Child Welfare Indicators Project, conducted by the University of California at Berkeley on a continual basis. And here we're taking a look at allegations versus substantiations a little bit more. So you want to take a look at that bright blue line. Oh, I guess it's not really bright blue. It's more of a greeny blue. That top line is allegations. So alleged abuses that were looked into. And the bottom, the purple line is, eggplant purple line is substantiations, meaning issues that were looked at and yes, they were believed that yes, abuse had occurred, right? And these were the entries into the system where the child was actually removed. So you can see it's more of a funnel effect, right? We have allegations or reports coming out more, and then those that were substantiated a lot less, and cases in which children were taken away from home even less. So if that is your worry, that because of your report a child will be removed from home, first of all, if that's the case, if that's what needs to happen, you're protecting the child and other children in the home. But at the same time, that usually is the very last resort. In every single case, that should be the very last resort for someone, and is a very last resort for child welfare services to also take a look at strategies that they have. They apply and use multiple strategies of engagement with the family and work on reunification before we have someone who is entered into the foster care system. So here, this allegation and substantiations are separated by age group. So as you can see, we really have a higher watchful eye of infants under the age of 1. And as the child grows and gets older, there's a lot less chances of someone being taken away from the home and a lot more chances of family reunification. And that could also be because, as you can see, allegations kind of drop down. And now 6 to 10 age, that's a little bit more. That's when they're entering school. This is probably primarily when they're still at home. And as they're older, it does drop down a little bit, but it's still in the 50,000. Each incidence per 1,000 children. It's still quite high. So the population density is still quite high, but you can kind of see that we really try to take a look at making sure that all reports, all reasons, susceptible reasons are reported, and that you are reassured that if it is not substantiated, a child will not be removed from home. Again, and there's no harm in not reporting. In fact, there's harm in not reporting. No harm in reporting, harm in not reporting. Sorry about that. So these are case openings by agency type. These are all different types of agencies within the welfare system, again, separated out by age. And you can see that the first service component is where they try to, again, maybe place in a short-term amount of care really quickly. And again, it's done by age, and they define it by colors that just look like a wonderfully blended rainbow here for me. So I'm sorry I'm not able to delineate any much more here, but this is an emergency response where a removal from home is done for a very short time while further assessment continues to happen. Then what happens is we try to take a look at family maintenance. What type of services, skill sets, resources can we provide this family for them to really maintain together? And that's majority of the cases. And in the system where emergency response was done, the child was taken away from home, the first point, what we also want to do at that point is also family reunification. What can we do? And that's the highest level of cases. The count is quite high. And permanent placement, again, out of the 2,400 that were taken out of their homes in an emergency response, about 1,400 or 1,500 of them we had to find permanent placement outside of the family home. So even as an emergency response, if things were taken in a period from April 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2018, 1,500 places were found for permanent placement, which was still almost 2/3 of the number as those that we had to respond early to. So more than 1,000 of the children did go back to family reunification. And a lot of them, the child was not taken away from home. Reunification was found to be the very first model of intervention to be used. And then there's supportive transition. It could be a supportive transition to a family member or a guardian within the childcare system as well. And 0 of the child going missing, which is really actually a great number to see. So this is just some up-to-date information on the reports of child abuse and neglect in the state of California, just so that you are aware. And now let's talk about who is a mandated reporter. A mandated reporter is any individual who is mandated by law to report known or suspected instances of child maltreatment. They are primarily people who have regular contact with children because of their employment. I'm going to take a look at over 40 different categories are listed for CANRA, and PC stands for Penal Code. So CANRA Penal Code 11165.7, and they are listed here in our wonderful list of mandated reporter categories. So I'm going to pull up this list here really quickly and show you what that looks like. All right, so here is a list of those who should mandate, right? And this is updated every year by the California Department of Social Services. And I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little and show you that mandated reporters are in different categories, right? We've got physicians and surgeons and firefighters, public administrators, athletic coaches, computer technicians, child visitation monitors, coroner's offices, animal control officers, teachers, instructional aides, pupils, employee of county office or education in the California Department of Education, Head Start teachers, licensed workers, evaluators by any agency, employee of any school district, district attorneys, special education teachers, licensed nurses, nursing students, doctors, medical students. There's our category: social workers, marriage and family therapists, psychological assistant. Wow, somehow I'm feeling like I'm saying that wrong. Sorry about that. Keeps things interesting. Unlicensed marriage and family therapist interns. Same thing with ACSWs also. And we have clergy members, custodians of any records of clergy, probation officers, parole officers, district attorneys, assistant district attorneys, employees of any police department, sheriff's department, probation department, court-appointed advocates, and any licenses or administration where an employee of a licensed community care or daycare facility. All of them are mandated reporters, and all of them have a training module that we have to complete. So the training that you're receiving today is from a training module from the child abuse mandated reporter training as part of California's method of training. So I want you to be reassured that that is all in compliance, and also to show you that the list of these mandated reporter categories continues to grow, and we continue to add to it year to year. So one of the things you want to think about is deciding when to report, right? And by penal code, the exact quote is, when one has knowledge of or observes a child in his or her professional capacity or within the scope of their employment whom he or she knows or reasonably suspects has been the victim of child abuse or neglect. That is when you report, right? So one of the first things that I will always tell you is, if you suspect abuse, report. We are not required to collect proof of abuse. That's going to be determined through investigations done by child welfare professionals and law enforcement. And we are not part of those agencies. If we suspect, we report. So one of the things that I want to point out in this definition that was changed a couple of years ago is this clause here: professional capacity or within the scope of your employment. Before the changes in 2016, the law used to state that anyone, if you are a mandated reporter, deemed a mandated reporter, you're a walking, talking mandated reporter and are so at family meetings, gatherings in the park, on your time off. And this is something that they've changed to add on that this is now within your professional capacity or within the scope of your employment. So again, I'm a social worker. I'm a living, breathing social worker. So am I a social worker on the street? Absolutely. If I have enough information to, and I suspect abuse, then I can report. But you can see when we take a look at the form, it is very hard to gather information to make an abuse report if you do not know the individual, and that's why it's limited to within the scope of your work, because otherwise there would be a lot of suits about individuals misreporting or not reporting allegations of failure to report. So again, the penalty for failure to report is that it's a misdemeanor punishable by 6 months in jail or up to $1,000 fine. It may also result in a civil lawsuit, especially if the child victim or another child is further victimized, and it will most definitely result in the loss of your professional license or credentials and employment, I could say. Confidentiality, the identity of the reporting party, yourself, is kept confidential. It will only be disclosed in documentation to official agencies and professionals who are involved in the investigation, prosecution, and record keeping of those cases. If anyone violates your right to confidentiality, it is also a misdemeanor and punishable for up to 6 months in county jail or $500 fine or both. And you do, as a mandated reporter, have immunity. Mandated reporters are immune from criminal or civil liability for reporting as required. So if you reported a case was unsubstantiated, that parent or that family could not try to sue you because you do, again, you're doing this out of the goodness of protecting someone rather than to cause harm. So now we're going to get into talking about defining child abuse and neglect. And under the Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act, anyone under the age of 18 is considered a child. And the perpetrator could also be another child. And the following 4 different types of abuse must be reported: physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. We're going to go into definitions of physical abuse and some indicators of physical abuse and each different types of abuse thereafter. I want to warn you, some of this information may be very shocking. So please, again, take care of yourself. If you need to step out of the room, please do so. If you need to check in with a facilitator, please do so. The first definition here is for physical abuse: the willful harming or injuring of a child or the endangering of the person or health of a child. Unlawful corporal punishment or injury willfully inflicted resulting in a traumatic condition. And physical injury or death inflicted by other than accidental means, meaning intentional injury. And again, those points in yellow are what I want you to remember. Willful harm, injury caused by willful harm. Right? Those are the 2 words that keep popping up over and over again. With physical abuse, there has to be an injury where either their life is endangered, corporal punishment resulting in a traumatic condition or a bruise, right? And it's done so intentionally with the intention to harm them or cause death, right? It is not a point of discipline at this point. It is now punishment willfully inflicted to cause harm. And so here are some indicators of child physical abuse. Any injury that is with an improbable explanation or when an individual is delayed in seeking treatment. If there's bruises in various stages of healing. If there's a statement made by the child that the injury occurred by abuse. If there are bite marks or burns, or any injury to an infant should be assessed to make sure that it does not qualify for child abuse indicators. The location of the bruise is also an indicator. If it's in the cheek, ear, neck, back, buttocks, genitals, these injuries that may have a pattern or distinct outlines are usually not done so by accident. They are usually intentional. And these locations are also very hard to bruise or to have locations of these bruises to be in an accidental way. Most of them are intentional. So here, let's talk about infants really quickly and what are the developmental abilities of an infant, a child. And when you're evaluating injuries, if a child is unable to roll over or crawl, then they're unlikely to sustain any injury on their own, right? So if a 2-month-old is, you want to take a look at their milestones, a 2-month-old should be able to lift their head, right? 2 to 3 months old. 4 months old, 4 to 6 months old should be able to roll over front to back. A 6-month-old should be able to roll in both direction and should be able to sit up. A 9-month-old should be starting to crawl or cruise. A 12 to 14-month-old should be able to walk. An 18-month-old should be able to run, and a 2-year-old, 24-month-old should be able to walk upstairs. So if you have a report that my 6-month-old was trying to crawl down the stairs and they fell, well, a 6-month-old is not crawling at this time. You know, there are a few exceptions, but you want to take a look at those. And again, if you suspect abuse, you want to report. So you want to keep some of these milestones in mind in order to make sure that you're assessing for abuse for infants. And again, these next 5 slides are pictures of very disturbing bruises. And so you may find them disturbing. These are pictures taken of children who are seen at the Rady Children's Hospital in San Diego in the emergency department. And they came in because of allegations of physical abuse. So, please be mindful. Be mindful. And I wanted to make sure that there's a warning before we kind of go into this graphic. They're not quite graphic, but they are still, again, pictures of children. So I wonder, can you tell me, what do you see here? Hopefully you answered that these are finger marks. So this is a child who was intentionally slapped, where you can see the 4 fingers of the hand, some lines even from the palm of the hand going onto the ear. You could even see that. And there's bruising and discoloration. So this had to be very, very sharp and sudden for the bruising to be left for this long. This looks like a very young child as well. All right, next picture here. I gave it away in the title. As you can see, this is an ear bruise. You can see that it's healing in multiple stages. In the center here, it's a different color than it is here, and that could be because of the range of the pinch, the intensity of the pinch, and it had to be pinched so hard that it left multiple degrees of burns, or were pinched multiple times in the same location to leave multiple bruises. This is pattern bruising across a child's torso. And you can see the pattern of a shoe right here. So this is, again, someone who was held down for a very long time with their feet so that the pattern was able to show. These are grab marks, as indicated. You could see where the fingers left points, 3 up here, possibly a 4th one, and the thumb grab down here potentially. The last one, what does this look like? This right here is the tip of a belt. So you can see the very edge of the belt left such a hard line on for this individual that it left a pattern bruising. Also, you want to take a look at the melatonin, the skin color of the child victim that you're working with. Depending on the skin color, we all bruise differently. And you can't see me, but I'm kind of medium melatonin, which means if I bruise in various stages. It might be red, it might be yellow, it might be purple. And you won't be able to tell if it's fresh or not. Especially if I go to the doctors and they have to draw blood, I will have multiple marks in my arms that look like they're healing very differently. So you always want to ask, I wonder what happened. Could you tell me what happened to cause that mark? And not give any other information, so that you can gather enough information to see, again, if an abuse report needs to be made. Any questions about child physical abuse? Again, I'm not there to take a look around, so I'm going to ask the facilitator to do the looking around for me. So facilitator, if there are questions, please put me on hold. All right, otherwise we continue with child neglect. Negligent treatment or maltreatment of a child by a person who's responsible for their care, their primary care. It, of course, can include acts or omissions, either some things that have been done to the child or omitted, have not been done to the child. That neglect either causes harm or threatens the harm of the child's welfare or health. So there's 4 different types of neglect. The very first one, severe neglect. Intentional failure of caregiver to provide food, clothing, shelter, or medical care, or to protect the child from severe malnutrition. Caregiver willfully causes or permits child's health to be endangered. That is definitely a reason for you to report. General neglect, failure of caregiver to provide food, clothing, shelter, medical care, supervision, where no physical injury has occurred, right? As a caregiver, it is your duty to take care of your child. And if these are not provided, but the child's health was not endangered, it's considered still neglect, general neglect. And that's, again, to differentiate the severity of the neglect. The last two, medical neglect, failure for the caregiver to provide appropriate medical care or dental care, with the exception for religious considerations. If you are not sure, you should report. And then it is up to the investigating agencies and child welfare services to find that exception. But if you do not know, if you suspect, you report. Emotional neglect, not interacting with an infant or child, and this, of course, can lead to sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, but also not interacting with a child is considered a severe form of neglect in that sense, because it will affect the developmental capabilities of that infant and child. Here are some indicators of neglect: a child's description of the living situation, poor hygiene, inappropriate dress, early arrival or late departure, always being hungry, always tired or fatigued, begging or stealing for food, unattended physical or medical problems, delinquent behaviors, or a lack of supervision. And of course, our indicators should be evaluated within the context of the family's culture, values, and economic situation. Remember, being homeless is not causing a child abuse. If a family is homeless together, that by and law they are not causing harm or abuse to the child, as long as they're doing the very best that they can. That has to do with the economic conditions of the family and the context of where they're surviving. So being homeless is not a crime, right? Child sexual abuse. So per Canada Act, child sexual abuse includes sexual assault and sexual exploitation. Sorry, before we go into sexual assault, I again want to emphasize, if you have any questions about child neglect here, please, facilitator, pause the training and address the questions in the room. Otherwise, let's move forward. Child abuse, again, so we talked about the two different types of child abuse indicators, which are child sexual assault and child sexual exploitation. Sexual assault is the rape, statutory rape, incest, sodomy, lewd or lascivious acts upon a child, oral sex, or sexual penetration. The intentional touching or fondling of a child's genitals or intimate parts of clothing covering them for purposes of sexual arousal or gratification, and masturbating in the presence of a child. So these are the formal definitions for child sexual assault. Definition for sexual exploitation is preparing, selling, or distributing pornographic materials involving children, performances involving obscene sexual conduct, employment of minors to perform obscene acts, and depicting a minor engaged in obscene acts are all considered sexual exploitation. And some indicators are disclosures of sexual abuse by the child. They say that they have been abused, then yes, you should report. Sexualized behavior and knowledge of sexual events beyond their developmental expectations. If you have a 4-year-old that is acting out a sex scene, so that again is not something that a 4-year-old should know, should be outside of the developmental age for a 4-year-old. So you have some reasonable suspicion to suspect, and then of course report. You want to find out a little bit more about that before you do the report, as you'll see when we get to the form, but you really want to take a look, and this should start kind of tingling your spidey senses that something's going on. Inappropriate sexual behavior with their peers. You also want to take a look at inappropriate sexual behaviors if there's role playing going on or dolls involved. Again, why is it so hard for children to talk about child sexual abuse, right? And it's because of these three factors: fear, shame, and guilt. With fear, they're afraid of the perpetrator, or again, of being believed. If they're believed, there's consequences of that disclosure. Someone's going to be taken away. And usually it's someone close to the child, a family member or a close friend, right? Or of not being believed and the abuse from the perpetrator getting worse. Shame, revealing the secret that the perpetrator has created in their mind, something that the perpetrator has really developed a astute sense to keep the child quiet, that they now become shameful at revealing that secret, thinking that sex is shameful or an embarrassing subject. And this hasn't happened to anyone else. Why did it happen to me? Right? That there's shame around that as well. Guilt, feeling complicit in the abuse, that they had some part in letting the abuse take place. Again, the child's mind can only take on so much, and starts to sort of feel guilty about why they didn't respond sooner. Same thing, why didn't they respond sooner? Why didn't they tell sooner, or run away, or scream, or make it stop? That's also associated with the guilt that a child victim feels, and is part of the sort of trifecta of why someone finds it so hard to report child sexual abuse themselves. So some things for you to keep in mind. Again, if there are any questions about child sexual abuse, please, facilitator, pause the training and address the questions in the room. All right, so if there are not any questions, we shall move forward to emotional abuse. We must report abuse that results from verbal disclosures, right? Or direct observation, and involves any person willfully causing or permitting a child to suffer unjustified physical pain, mental suffering, or endangering the child person's health. You may report knowledge or suspicion that a child is suffering or is at risk for suffering serious emotional damage, such as severe anxiety, depression, withdrawal, untoward aggressive behaviors towards others. This is part of a penal code that says, again, if someone disclosed to you that they made a verbal disclosure that their parent is emotionally abusing them, then we must report. If you have direct observation, and where any person willfully is causing someone physical harm, mental suffering, or endangering their health, then you have a duty to report. But if you may report if you have a suspicion, right? I would always say, again, if you suspect, you report. So emotional abuse is one of the most toughest form of abuse to identify, and you can see because more often than not, it's seen in a combination of other forms of abuse. And sometimes it takes more than one report to be made in order for action to be taken by child welfare services. And again, witnessing domestic violence may be reported as emotional abuse. If the child victim did see domestic violence happen from the perpetrator to the victim. But also, if the child victim got in the way of domestic violence and was pushed themselves, then that can then be an indicator of physical abuse. And that's also something to keep in mind about what happened, and really getting and capturing that story of what took place. So here's some risk factors, some red flags, some to consider, some cultural considerations. It's important, of course, to be aware of our own cultural biases, beliefs, and lenses, and this can affect our perceptions, right? So child abuse or neglect can occur in any family, regardless of socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, religion, education, ethnic background, or any other factor. It is the one commonality that the human race has, that child abuse and neglect can happen with any family, anywhere. I will share a story with you now really quickly about a case that I worked on in the Fresno County area, where a Hmong family in middle school, their child was taken away by CPS quite quickly. We were consulted on the case, and this child was asked to do scoliosis tests. If you remember from a couple of years, from back when you were in school or when your kids were in school, scoliosis tests are where, you're asked to bend forward, they lift up your shirt and they take a look at your back. And this one child was very hesitant to having the staff lift their back. Staff thought this was all about, the child not being comfortable. So they tried to create some private space so that kids around them couldn't see, but still the child was very hesitant. But the shirt was lifted enough to show little small red burn marks along the side of the child's spine. The child didn't want to talk about it. And the next day the child was missing from school. So after consultation, the school decided to take the matters at hand, make an abuse report, and the child was removed from home. CPS went through, and afterwards quickly returned when the case was further assessed and investigated. And it turned out that in the child's culture, in the Hmong culture, the child was sick. And when that happens in their culture, what they do is they take a very hot object, it could be a stone, in this case they used a quarter, and they heated up the sides of the quarter, and then they rolled the quarter up and down both sides of the spine of this child to drive away the energy, the sort of bad energy, the germs that they needed in order to make this child feel better. And again, sort of regenerate their body temperature so that, they'll kick the fever and feel better. So again, was there willful intention to harm the child? Absolutely not. It was exactly the opposite. The intention was to help the child. And yes, there was injury, but again, injury not in the form of punitive punishment, but to help the child. So again, we've got to take a look at some of those factors. And this, CPS did walk in and talk about, other medical ways of managing things and they worked both with the school to update the school about Hmong cultural practices and also worked with the family for them to understand why did this happen, right? Why was this on such a high alert that the school had to step in and call child welfare services in the first place? So again, we want to keep that cultural consideration lens very, very brief. You want to keep in mind that our cultural influences when we assess for information or behavior. We also want to take a look at the education level of the families that we're working with from other cultures, even if they are part of the American culture, right? And if they're not, what we want to do is sort of talk to them about American culture expectations and practices. However, if that practice falls within the legal definition of child abuse, doesn't matter of what culture, it should be reported, and it must be reported. So here's some concerning behaviors or red flags that you should be wary of. A child acting anxious or hyperactive, withdrawn or depressed, doing self-harm to themselves, having low self-esteem, aggressive behaviors. There you have a use of alcohol or other drugs or other delinquent behaviors, wariness of adults, fear of parents or of going home, inappropriate clothing, though of course maybe you need to be aware of cultural issues and economic issues around inappropriate clothing as well. Again, these don't always show, yes, there's abuse going on, but they might be red flags for you to take a look at and investigate further. Again, when abuse is reported, what you want to do is you want to talk to the child, right? And how do you want to do that? You want to conduct this discussion in private. You want to sit with them on the same level, eye to eye. That might mean having them sit higher than you are. You want to use language that the child understands. And of course, you want to allow this child to tell you of their experiences in their own words. Do not ask leading or suggestive questions. You want to have them disclose to you what's happening. Explore concerns to see if report is warranted. Do not investigate. So this piece here about avoiding leading or suggestive questions in the line of questioning in a court, if a child is using language or vocabulary that they would not have heard otherwise, they would not have knowledge of otherwise before your interview, then the case can be thrown out and they can say that the child had been led to say this by the investigators and that no abuse has occurred. So that's called tampering, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. You also want to make sure that to have a second individual present, sort of witnessing your intervention and your interview with the child victim. When abuse is suspected, if a child does disclose abuse, you want to keep in mind your emotional response, right? We have to put the mask on ourselves first before we work with someone else. So keep in mind about your emotional response, keep calm. Do not express shock or disapproval or disgust towards the child, their parent, or the disclosure. Be aware that the child may not show any particular emotion, right? Depends on what they're going through and how much they understand about the situation. And provide appropriate reassurance. Tell them the truth. Let them know what's going to happen now as a result of the disclosure. Explain who you are going to tell, child welfare services or the police or both, and why. But again, provide appropriate reassurances. So, if you know that they're not going to, everything's going to be okay, right, but that okay might be a very long time. So, you're safe right now. You're safe with me right here. So appropriate assurances that are really focused on the intervals of time. And what, if anything, should you tell the parents, right? Would you tell the parents? And here are some things to consider: that it might increase the risk to the child, it might interfere with the investigation or your ability to deal with the reaction of the parents. Also, if you are working with the family together and you suspect child abuse and report, maybe there is a way for you to facilitate and take a look at this report as being a way for the family to receive help and for you to make the call in front of the family, so that, again, you're meeting your obligations as a mandated reporter, but also empowering the family to receive help. So it really depends on your role on the team and how you're able to see the situation and report the abuse. But again, if you're working at a cold weather shelter where we work with families and you see indicators of abuse and you interview the child and this is what you see, then again, how likely is that family to come back to the shelter the next night? Right? How likely is it that it's going to interfere with an investigation or increase the risk of that child or any other siblings at home? Those are all points that one should consider when thinking about disclosure to the parents. And the next step, what you want to do is you want to call the child abuse hotline. So who files a report? The responsibility rests solely on the mandated reporter. Reporting to your employer, your supervisor, your coworker is not enough. That's not called making a report. And let's say 2 or more mandated reporters jointly have knowledge or suspect child abuse. You only need to make 1 report. So any member of that reporting team who has knowledge of the designated, that someone who was designated to make the report failed to make the report, must then make the report and then also should think about reporting them as a failure to report. And what should you do? How should you report? You should first and foremost report by phone. You should do so immediately or as soon as things are safe for you to do so. You want to call the local child welfare services hotline and you want to talk about the suspicions of child abuse and neglect, and they should be reported to child welfare services, who are then going to cross-report to law enforcement agency. Police or sheriff may be contacted if the person is in immediate danger. Other law enforcement persons like school security, they're not authorized to receive child abuse reports, so that's not appropriate. It has to be through child welfare services or through 911 if that's the best way for you to put the information forward. So I have a 2-part form I want you guys to take a look at, and I'm going to bring up the first part here really quickly. Here we are. There we go. So this is the Child Abuse and Neglect Center, and here are some steps on what you should do in Santa Clara County. Again, if there's a life-threatening emergency to a child, you call 911 first. If not, here are the local areas to report child abuse and neglect to Department of Family and Children's Services. After you call, you file a child abuse report and you mail it in within 36 hours. Here's the address for you to do so. And this is something, very important information for you to sort of follow up on. I'm going to take it back. The second page has to do with the rest of the training. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happens after, what information you need to collect and what happens afterwards. So while you're on the phone with the child reporting agency, you also want to collect the person who's taking the report from you, their information before you hang up. What is their name and their direct line? Because that is something you have to write on the form, right? And we'll review the form together and where that goes. So after you've reported over the phone, you are now going to report in writing. You have to do so within 36 hours. A report has to be sent to the CPS or law enforcement agency, whoever you made the telephone call to, and you want to check the address with them. It must be filed. It has to be the SCAR form, the Suspected Child Abuse Report form. This form is available through county welfare departments and local law enforcement agency. And there's instructions also available on how you would do so at child abuse PDFs through the California government website. That form should be handy in front of you, and it looks like this. This is the online form, and you can print this out, and the definitions and instructions are on the back page. The reporting party's information goes where the red arrow is in section A. This is you. You are the reporting party. So you want to write your information here, your title, your mandated reporter category. Could be social worker, could be shelter staff worker, your business address. So this is your information, but your business information. So you want to write your work phone number, your work address, and what's going on with that. Next, section B is information of the person who's taking the report, the person that was on the phone with you. You want to check off, was it law enforcement or county probation or county welfare office, and what agency, their address, their official title, the person's name, their phone number, all of that. When did you call, the date and time of call? You want to make sure that you have the same information that they have. This arrow is in the wrong place. It should be in section C, right? Oh, sorry about that. My mouse is haunted. Yep, Definitely haunted. Sorry, give me one moment. All right, I'm not going to mess with the mouse. C. So imagine that purple arrow and just make it one section up. The victim's information, their name, date of birth, address, school, their current location, where are they, if they have a physical disability, a developmental disability, what's their primary language, are they in foster care? Are they out of the home? What type of abuse was it? What's their relationship to the suspect? Were there any photos taken? All of that information should be recorded here. If you don't have it, write NA. And again, what you want to do is have a copy of this form when you're talking to the person, so that if they can help you fill out this form when you're making the report by phone, they will tell you if you have enough information to make a report. Right? If you can fill out this form in the entirety, you have enough information to make a report, and you should and must report. But again, if you have reasonable suspicion but you don't know what to do about it, you're going to want to call the hotline and want to do a consultation and say, this is what I know. Do I have enough to report? Right? Next, of course, is the involved parties, any siblings, parents, and the suspect. You want to talk about any information about victims, siblings, victims, parents, or guardians, and information about the suspect who may be the same as the parent or guardian or different. You want to write that information in this section here. In the last section, incident information, when and where did the abuse occur, what happened, the narrative description of what took place, and what the mandated reporter either saw or what was reported to you as a mandated reporter. That's the information that you want to write here. And you also want to make a copy of this before you mail it off. And that's something for you to do. And a copy of both CPS APS reports are available at both of our cold weather shelter sites and both of our full-time shelter sites at Sunnyvale and here in San Jose as well. So now we're going to take a look at adult protective services in detail and things as well. So the form is here. We're going to review the form and the different areas of the form in general in a little bit. But what happens after you make that report? Right, for APS or CPS. That report is then assigned to be investigated by a county welfare agency, Child Protective Services, and or by local law enforcement, depending on the severity of the event and the lethality of the event and to the child victim. So Child Welfare Services, their response time, depending on the seriousness of the event, the age of the child, the situation that they face, and any known history that might influence the decision, could be very quick or could be, more than 10 days. So if a child is in immediate danger, they're going to arrive either with law enforcement or right by their side. If there's less risk involved, it might take 3 to 10 days for action to be taken, and that's completely normal. The primary responsibility for Child Welfare Services is to protect the child. They interview all parties involved, including yourself, assess for risk, offer services and resources to family as needed, and on very rare occasions, they need to remove the child or the children from home to ensure their safety. And some possible outcomes that can happen is that the child is determined to be safe at home, and services might be offered to the family for support. The child then another option could be that the child remains at homes with a safety plan. It could be a voluntary plan or a court-appointed service. The last, of course, that the child is determined to be unsafe at home, and that's when they are removed and placed in out-of-home foster care, and of course, preferably with a relative. Law enforcement, their primary responsibility is to investigate for the purposes of criminal prosecution. They also share the responsibility to protect the child, and if abuse or neglect meets legal criteria, alleged abuser may be arrested and the case forwarded to the district attorney for further processing. So in the follow-up, what might happen is that Child Welfare Service or law enforcement agency might contact you to gather more information to help with the investigation. And when the investigation is completed, they do sometimes let the mandated reporter know the results of the investigation and if any action was taken, and that's up to the penal code as well. And that might take a little while depending on the length of the investigation and concerns to the child victim. Some key points to remember: that the primary intent of the reporting laws is to protect the child. Protecting the identified child may also provide opportunity to protect other children at home. It's equally important to provide assistance or resources to the parents. And the report of abuse might be the catalyst, the thing that was needed to change in the home environment, which could help lower the risk of abuse in the home and also help the risk of abuse to other children as well. Also, as a mandated reporter, you play a crucial role in identifying and calling concerns of abuse for children, and that may otherwise go unseen. So if the story seems confusing or implausible, report. If you aren't certain, report. Call Child Welfare Services if you need some help in determining what is considered reasonable suspicion. And again, never investigate, report. Right. So now, if there's any questions about child welfare services or working with CPS and the laws there are for child maltreatment and neglect, please, facilitator, pause me and address them. Otherwise, we'll move on to adult protective services. All right, so we'll move on to adult protective services and mandated reporting laws. And so when do you report for adult protective services? Anyone, I want you to remember, anyone over the age of 65 or someone who is a dependent adult whose physical or mental health and capabilities are being taken care of by a caregiver, someone else is giving them care to make sure that their daily activities of living are being met, then they're considered a dependent adult and are covered at any age under the Adult Protective Services Act. And so when should you report? The differences here are not just the 4 different categories of abuse, but the abuses are in 5 different categories here with physical abuse, neglect, abandonment, financial abuse, and isolation. Oops, computer's haunted now. Physical abuse means any of the following: assault, battery, assault with a deadly weapon or force likely to produce great bodily injury, unreasonable physical restraint or continual deprivation of food or water. So I wonder if you guys know the differences between assault and battery. This is a great place to put me on pause. I know you love my voice by now. Okay, so physical abuse, assault. Assault could be verbal. Assault could also be physical. Assault could also be a verbal threat. Battery is when a use of force is made. Either you are pushed, that there's physical contact, where your hands could be seen as a weapon or a tool, like a phone or a water bottle or a hammer is seen as, along with the assault. Along with the assault, the battery piece is the actual physical contact that's made. So assault is, again, could be physical, could also be verbal assault, and batteries is with the use of force, right? So assault with a deadly weapon or force that's likely to produce great bodily injury is a combination of assault and battery. Sexual assault. This would mean sexual battery, rape, spousal rape, incest, sodomy, oral copulation, or penetration of a genital or anal opening by a foreign object. The use of a physical or chemical restraint or psychotropic medication under any of the following condition is also considered physical assault: for punishment, for a period beyond in which the medication was ordered by the physician or surgeon who's licensed in the state of California, who's providing care for the elder or dependent adult at the time the instructions were given, and if that medication was given for anything besides what the doctor wrote the note for, right? For any purposes not authorized by the physician or surgeon. That's a little bit about physical abuse and adult sexual abuse. Neglect can mean one of either one of these. The negligent failure of any person having the care or custody of an elder or dependent adult to exercise a degree of care that a reasonable person would in that situation would exercise, meaning failure to prevent them from falling. Right? The negligent care of a person themselves to exercise a degree of care that a reasonable person would likely to exercise for themselves. So this is self-neglect. This is saying that if you have the ability to eat, and one would eat at least 3 times a day, a senior is deciding to eat cat food once a day. right? That's self-neglect versus not feeding the elder or not, and we'll talk a little bit more about what other things that can happen. But again, you want to think of acts that are done to the person or omissions, keeping them from their meal, from visitors are all seen as adult neglect. Neglect includes, but is not limited to, the following: failure to assist in personal hygiene or the provision of food, clothing, or shelter, failure to provide medical care for physical or mental health needs. No person shall be deemed neglected or abused for the sole reason that they voluntarily rely on treatment by spiritual means through peril alone in lieu of medical treatment. But again, if you have suspicion and you don't know the reason that why they are practicing a failure to receive medical care, then you should report. Right? Again, we do not investigate, we report. Failure to report from health and safety hazards, to protect from health and safety hazard. Failure to prevent malnutrition or dehydration. Failure of a person to provide the needs specified in the last four, inclusive for themselves due to ignorance, illiteracy, incompetence, mental limitations, substance use, or poor health. So again, all of this could be self-induced. It could be self-neglect. So it could be someone failing to provide personal hygiene care for you, or you failing to provide personal hygiene for yourself. Any questions about the child is going to be stuck in my head. Adult physical abuse, adult sexual abuse, or adult neglect? Facilitator, please stop me and address questions in the room. Otherwise, we're going to move forward to adult abandonment. Abandonment means a desertion or willful forsaking of an elder or a dependent adult by anyone who's having to take care of them under circumstances in which a reasonable person would continue to care for them. So here's an example. A facility takes a group of residents for afternoon play to a public location. One of the residents wanders off, and the group returns to the facility, leaving that resident behind. Right? This is considered adult abandonment because, again, you have to count everyone that's left the facility, and you have to really look for them and search for them before returning, which means you have to maybe get everyone back into the vehicle and then look for the staff or even call 911 before you return to the facility. Otherwise, it's seen as abandonment, that you have a reasonable person, right? What would a reasonable person do? A reasonable person would look for this individual, right? That's something to keep in mind. Adult financial abuse. Financial abuse occurs when a person or entity does any of the following. You take, secrete, appropriate, or retain real or personal property from an elder or dependent adult for wrongful use or with the intent to defraud them, or both. Or you assist in taking, secreting, appropriating, retaining real or personal property from an elder or dependent adult for the wrongful use or the intent of defrauding them, or both. Right? So here's an example so you can see this better. That a staff member at a facility takes a resident, asks a resident if they would like some pizza. Well, they say yep. The staff member then orders pizza using the resident's personal account money and then gives the pizza to the night shift. Now that is willful intent to defraud, and that's stealing. That's taking funds, secreting fund, real property from them. A resident has a cell phone, and it's purchased by a family member. A staff member tells the residents that they're going to keep the phone at the nurse's station and then uses the cell phone for her personal use. Right? Again, same thing. That is with the intent. That's wrongful use here. That's defrauding. That's illegal. And in both incidences, these individuals can go to jail. And again, we should report adult financial abuse. There's also other types, but those are the two examples that I could think of to share with you guys about financial abuse. Also, if someone is opening up, let's say grandma or grandpa's social security checks and not using it to purchase food or items that are necessary for the grandparent, but are using it for their own personal welfare without the knowledge of the senior, that they're using it to get their own cell phone, to buy shoes, or just some examples there. Adult isolation. Isolation means any of the following: acts intentionally committed for the purpose of preventing, that do serve to prevent, an elder or dependent adult from receiving their mail or telephone calls. Right? You are intentionally preventing them from receiving their mail or telephone calls. Telling a caller or visitor that the adult, the dependent adult or senior, is not present and does not wish to talk to them or does not wish to meet with them, when this statement is false, right? When in fact the senior has told them, hey, please let them know, even if they're competent or not, right? It's made with the purpose of preventing the elder from having contact with their family, friends, or concerned persons. So if the person's told them, if someone says, I don't wish to talk to you, if so and so comes to the door, I don't want to talk to them, right? Now you're just sharing what the person has told you. But if it's to the contrary of what they've expressed, if they say, if my mom comes by, and this is a dependent adult, they say, my mom comes by, please let me know. I would like to talk to them. And you may have some feelings about, well, is your mom going to come by? They haven't come by the last 60 times. This is the 61st, and lo and behold, mom is here. And you may want to say, no, F word here, right? Insert F word here, off. And but they've said that they want to see them, so it is your right and your duty to then make sure that this dependent adult has the ability to meet with their parent, right? So if you are willfully stopping someone from receiving their mail, phone calls, or visitations when they've specifically said that they've needed to, then this is called adult isolation. And false imprisonment is also seen as isolation. If you lock a senior in their house, if, again, the use of physical restraints, we were talking about physical abuse, right? If you lock them if you tie them down on their bed, or if you give them medication so that grandma can sleep at 3 o'clock and then you can have a party by 5, when in fact this was supposed to be taken as a PRN at night in case grandma doesn't fall asleep, right? Can't sleep. That's all physical abuse, but isolation would be imprisoning them so that they cannot see visitors or receive mail or phone calls. The last one, physical restraint. Physical restraint shows up in adult isolation either, also with physical abuse. So physical restraint for the purposes of preventing them from meeting other visitors, right? Is isolation as well. So there's 2 different types of abuse. So again, if you're giving them medication or restraining them just because it's easier for you to care for them, that's physical abuse. You don't want grandma to wander away, so you lock her, you tie her down to a bed. That's physical abuse. But if you prevent them from meeting other people, you lock them in a room or restrain them from meeting other people, that's adult isolation. So some differences there. Abduction. Abduction means the removal from this state and the restraint from returning to this state of any elder or dependent adult who doesn't have the capacity to give consent from being taken out of the state, as well as from restraining from returning from the state of any conservative or of any conservatee without the consent of their conservator or the court. So if you take a senior out of the state of California without their consent, that's abduction. If you prevent their return, if you prevent them from returning and say you can't go back, that's also considered abduction. If you remove a senior from a facility, that could also be seen as an abduction if there is a conservator involved. Right? So you really want to take a look at field trips. You really want to take a look at consent, and you want to document consent if you're ever in this case. And that is because the state of California has a lot more rights for adults and elderly individuals than other states around us. So that is one of the reasons why we want to ensure that their rights are protected in the state of California. How to make a report. Making a report mandates that it requires you to do one of both parts. Either you have to report incidents of known or suspected abuse, right? So same goes for Child Protective Services. Either you suspect, you have reasonable suspicion, or you've witnessed the abuse, right? You've seen it happen. So one of the ways you do it is by telephone immediately or as soon as practically possible to the local ombudsman or the local law enforcement agency. And then you would also do this by written report for the Department of Social Services. You're going to use a very specific form, the report of suspected dependent elder abuse. They should be sent in 2 working days. So it's not 36 hours. You've got 2 working days, which means if a report happens on Friday night, you have until Tuesday to turn it in. So making a report, you have to do so by phone immediately. So we're going to take a look at this form and we're going to review it together. You should do that by phone immediately. And I want to take a look at the steps here really quickly as well. Sorry, haunted computer. Here we are. So this is a section on adult protective services. You would call APS to report dependent adult or elder abuse. Here are the two phone numbers, the 800 number and the local APS number as well. Once you have, again, you want to hold this form with you, the one that I'm showing you, and see if you can fill out the information and consult with them if you have enough information to report. Even if they kind of tell you, and you have enough information, you should definitely make the report. Get of course, their information before you hang up. And then after you do that, there's two forms of doing so. One is for suspecting dependent adult elder abuse, and the financial institutions use the other form. If you're reporting financial abuse, there's another form that you could use as well. You want to mail this report within 2 working days. Again, you want to take a copy of it. And if you're reporting an agency, a long-term healthcare agency, you want to call the long-term care ombudsman in our area and this phone number here in order to report abuse to the agency, as well as documenting adult protective services abuse for the victim. So this form, you want to take a look. This is a little bit bigger than the other one. You want to write the victim's information here, their name, their date of birth, age. Are they verbal? Do they speak English? If not, what other language? What is their gender, social security, ethnicity, their address? What is their current location if different from above? And how are they considered and protected by APS laws? Are they elderly, over the age of 65, physically disabled, developmentally disabled, mentally disabled? Again, unknown, you don't know, right? It's better to check any one of these categories. Again, if you do not check any one or you don't know which one, then you want to write unknown or other. If any information you have, again, lives alone or lives with others, you must check. If you don't know, write NA if it doesn't apply, right? Next, you want to write the suspected abuser's information. If this was self-neglect, right, you want to check that off too. That's located here. Otherwise, you would write, and if it's self-neglect, you would write their name here, that they are the suspected abuser. Otherwise, if you know the name of the suspected abuser, you would write their name, their address, their phone number, and how are they related? What's the relationship here? Are they the care custodian? Are they the health practitioner? Are they the parent, the spouse, the son, the daughter, any other relation, right? And what's their gender, ethnicity, age, date of birth, height, weight, eyes, ears, if you have it. If not, write NA, right? Next, it's all about you, the reporting party. This is where you would write. Again, there's a box if you waive your confidentiality to everyone, right? Or if you don't waive, then you leave it, right? Next, you would write your name, your occupancy, your agency's name, your relation to the individual, your address, right? The address, again, use your agency's address, use your agency's email, use your agency's telephone number. And here is the reporting information, the who, what, when, where, why. We're starting to do that here, right? Where did the incident take place? You want to write the date and the time, and the place of the incident should be checked off. Next, you want to report the types of abuse, all that is indicated here. Was it perpetrated by someone else? Was it self-neglect? And what did that look like? So section E, there's 3 parts to it. The first 2 parts have to do with what type of abuse it was and how it was perpetrated. And the very last one is the results. Because of the abuse, what happened? Right? As a result, what happened? Again, APS is asking for a lot more information than CPS does, and that is for a very particular reason. Adults are much more protected, but everyone over the age of 65 has rules and regulations, and we want to make sure that they're protected as well. So when we're infringing upon someone, and we want to make sure that there is enough information that we're collecting in order to really deem this being as elder abuse. Second page. The second page here is in section F, you're going to write your observations, your beliefs, the statement from the victim. Does the alleged perpetrator still have access to the victim? Do they have a key to get in? Do they have access to their financial records? Does the allegation involve a serious bodily injury? You want to take a look at time frames, list any potential dangers for the investigator, like animals or weapons or communicable diseases. And there's a little box that says check if medical, financial, such as account information, photographs, or other supplemental information is attached. They want to take a look at that as well. If you have that, please attach it. But here you want to answer all of those questions in frame F. right? Next, G, who else knows, right? What other person is believed to have knowledge of the abuse? And why do you think that is important, everyone? That's important because if there's a medical provider that know, they may have failed to report abuse, right? There's that failure to report. But also it might be that there could be collaboration. There could be another report made through either law enforcement agencies or APS in another area where the investigations can then combine. They're not as tightly knit of an organization as Child Protective Services is. So this gives them a heads up to really collaborate and do a joint investigation. Here you want to list all the family members or anyone who's responsible for the victim's care, even if this is the same person as the perpetrator themselves, right? And in fact, there is a, if unknown, you want to just write a contact person, someone that they can contact. And if they're contact only, there's a space for you to check here. Next, you want to write about the telephone report, right? Who was it made to? So you really want to get this information in I and J. Who did you call? APS, law enforcement, or local law ombudsman. Maybe you called all three, right? Who was the name of the official that you contacted by phone, their phone number, and when did you contact them? And the written report, who was it sent to? And again, you want to get this information from this person. Who was it sent to? When was it mailed? When was it faxed? And yes, sometimes you do have to double duplicate mail and fax. Sorry, haunted computer. And the last section here is for the receiving agency to use. We do not fill out the very end. That is for them to sort of deem and move the case forward in order for us to review this document. So that's some information here on reporting adult protective service, adult elder abuse through adult protective services. And of course, we went over child abuse before. So of course, if there are any questions at all, please ask the facilitator. I thank you for participating in this very important training to become California mandated reporters. And I thank you for working to protect individuals, to work with disenfranchised communities, and make sure that individuals are safe in every step of care that we provide. Again, if there's any questions, please ask the facilitators, and thank you very much.